This has been the craziest year. I went from making about 15 to 30,000 euros per month to my bank account hitting zero multiple times this year. I now find myself at the end of this year in an unfurnished cottage here in the countryside, which I'll show you in just a second. And when I was reflecting, I saw that I moved country about 5 times, visited about 6 or 7 countries, and I think I moved home about 22, 23 times in total this year. It's been such a transformative year. I'm going to share some of the key lessons as to how I got here, as well as the reflection points with my relationship to money and how that's really transformed. Before we get into that, I want to show you the cottage I've been living in. So this is the outside, this is the countryside. And in here, we have the beautiful cottage. So this has been my place where I've lived for the last 6 to 8 weeks or so. After coming from Bali, I bought a standing desk and a chair and stuff like that. That's where I do work. This is where I meditate in the morning, and this is where I just chill and hang out. This has been such a change from what I was used to living, because I used to stay in Airbnbs all around the world, and this has just been such a weird experience, but also a beautiful experience. It made me appreciate so many things in such a different way. So without further ado, let's dive into some of the lessons. I'm going to share really how I got here and how this year started. So throughout 2024, I was working with a lot of different clients. There was one community that had about 200 clients. There was another community that had about 500 clients. And there was another community that had about 150, as well as my own one-to-one clients and some product and systems-based work that I was doing behind the scenes to help people to not only get clients, but also to keep clients for a longer period of time. And also to help aid with the personal transformation internally for these clients so that they could experience the external results of more money or business growth or whatever the case was. So I was pretty stacked. I was taking a lot of calls each week, and this is where I grew my income to about 15 to 30,000 euros per month, which fluctuated because I was doing different things at different times. I would take on one-to-one clients, I would do some more group work. There was a variety of different things I was doing. I mentioned that because that brought me to the end of 2024 and into this journey that began in 2025. I started to feel a sense that I was going through a change and transition within myself. The way I was working and the emotion that was fueling a lot of the work behind what I was doing was starting to come to a halt. I felt like I was hitting a wall. I wasn't really excited about the groups I was working in. I wasn't really excited about how I was doing my own one-to-one work. And overall, I felt this sense that I needed to pull away and to go on this journey that I had no idea what it really was or how it was going to unfold. So that really led me to where I am today. But let's backtrack a little bit and map out some of the things, because I found myself at the end of January in 2025, earlier this year, taking my mother and my sister to Portugal for a short trip. And it was on that trip that I really started to feel like I had to begin to let go of some of the income that was, recurring every single month from these different communities. So I started to chat with the community owners, the work I was doing, and I let go of one. Then over the coming months, I let go of the other ones. And around that time, I also stopped taking on one-to-one clients. At least I wasn't marketing. I wasn't really talking too much about what I was doing. And that eventually led me to stop posting on Instagram as much and really take a step back. Around that time, after I was spending that time in Portugal, I went to New Zealand where I met up with some friends. And then I went to Bali after that, where I started to really feel this pull towards doing some real deep work. Now, I had been continuously on this journey of personal development, and the work that I do is based around these areas. So this is a constant curiosity for me. So I started to work with this Balinese healer. Now, I went and she was reading my palms. She was doing all of these astrological readings, balancing my chakras and all these different things that I was exploring in real time. And this woman lived in a hut in the middle of Ubud in the north of Bali. And it was a really interesting experience just to be part of what she was doing, and I found it really fascinating. And I remember hitting this moment where I was sitting there writing in my journal, and I came to this realization that I had been on this journey for the past number of months of trying to figure out what I needed to fix about myself. And when I sat there writing about this experience I had, I realized that there was nothing to fix. And a part of me felt good, But another part of me started to feel scared at the fact that there was kind of nothing to chase anymore, which was a very weird experience. And the reason I mentioned that is because that led me on this journey, which was about halfway through the year, around the beginning of June. That led me into this next 6-month period where up until that point I had some income coming in, but this is where my bank account started to drop completely, because I started to realize that I was on a completely different journey as to the one I had been on previous years, where I was on this journey of trying to fix myself or trying to heal, or there was certain things I was doing to figure out what I needed to do about myself to be able to experience a different emotional state, to experience different results. And even though my external results were good up until that point, something in me didn't like the way I was doing it. I felt a great sense of fear in how I was working. I was afraid to lose money. I was afraid that if I didn't keep growing, then who was I? What would it look like for me to stop and to actually sit with some of the emotions that I was really feeling underneath the surface? So that moment with this healer, as I was reflecting in my journal and writing about this, sent me on this path to start to play around with this word called embodiment. And I had seen this from a variety of different things I had read, or maybe a video I'd seen. And this term embodiment for me meant, instead of trying to search for a shift, you just become the shift. And I was like, wow, yeah, that resonates. I don't want to be the one chasing growth, chasing internal expansion or personal development or whatever you want to call it. I wanted to be the one who embodied it. I was the one actually being the version of myself I was trying to become, instead of always trying to become it. But what I didn't realize in that moment was that I made a choice that knocked a domino, and the rest of the dominoes that started to fall was me receiving these different challenges and tests to truly begin to embody what I say I wanted. So I share this with you to say that that was the knock-on effect of what was then about to come over these next 6 months. I was living in Bali. I had moved house 3 times in the first 2 months, where I was just moving from a villa in Ubud to a villa down in Uluwatu, where I lived down south for quite some time. And then I moved house about 3 or 4 times in the space of 3 months, because I just didn't feel at home or comfortable in these different places. Anyway, I started to experience this sense of fear when my bank account started going down and I was dipping into the limited savings that I had. I didn't have this much to be able to play around with. And all of my money started to go on me moving throughout these homes, because I had this kind of certainty within myself that I could just make it back. I could just figure it out, because that's what I've always done over the last number of years as I've traveled to these different countries. So I was really feeling this heavy fear around, well, what if it doesn't work out? What if you don't figure it out? And all of this stuff started to come up, because what I was stepping into was actually being the person who I wanted to become for such a long time. And these were the challenges and tests that life was presenting in front of me in order for me to make a new choice in those moments. So I still wasn't taking on any one-to-one clients. I started to explore digital products, and I started to explore what it might look like to create some tools and sell those instead of selling my one-to-one time. I experimented with some of those things, but I didn't really see much results from them. I started to see a couple of things coming in, but with all of the moving house and changes that were happening, things started to get harder and harder and harder and harder. And I remember moving into this one house, and when I went to view this house, it was beautiful. It had this very artistic feel to it. It was a house that was taken from a frame of a different house, over from Jakarta, which is the capital of Indonesia, over to the island of Bali. So it was carried over there. So it was an old frame. It was called the Juggalo. That's the frame of the house. And I was living in this home. I was excited about it because it was new and it was different, but I couldn't even sleep there. It was haunted. I could feel myself feeling consumed by these these dark, I don't know, entities or this energy that was there that I just felt really intimidated by, for no better term. Like, it was just intimidation. I was seeing this girl at the time, so I ended up sleeping there for 2 out of the 4 nights I ended up being there, even though I was supposed to stay there for a month. Now, I didn't have much resources at all, so I just put all my money in staying in this house. So I had all my money in this house, paying the rent, just trying to figure stuff out while not being able to actually stay in this house because of this, the craziness that was going on. There was one night I came home and there was 7 frogs in the house. 7 frogs just jumping around the house. There was this giant gecko that was constantly reappearing over the fan in my room. And I remember sharing a picture of this on my Instagram. This gecko was huge, and I could hear him in the house as I was sleeping at night, the times that I did stay there. And it was just this, this crazy gecko call, like that kind of noise. That was actually pretty good. That noise just really loud over my bed while I'm lying there looking up and being like, this is just fucked. So I had these experiences and I was moving around. I didn't have any money to play around with, so I had to get a refund from this house and then somehow convince this other guy who was renting this other house to let me pay in installments so that I could just pay a small bit up front after I got the money from this house, and had to try and get basically a refund from the house I just stayed in because it was haunted. And I was trying to explain to them that I just couldn't stay there, and it was all these things, and it was really complicated, and they were like, hey, we got to get someone else to move into this home. Anyway, I eventually got the money and I put it into this other home, and I somehow was able to just kind of wiggle my way into this deal with this guy who allowed me to pay in installments. And when I paid in installments, I had 1 payment done and I had no idea how I was going to make the next 2 to just cover the month that I was there. So I was constantly in this just stress of like, what do I do? What do I do? And the energy that I was just like living in, this emotion that I was just living in, was just this constant state of fear. I was just terrified. And it was so funny because previous to this, if I go back into 2024, I still did a lot of traveling, but I always just had this feeling of certainty that I would just figure it out, and I always did. But for some reason, this time was different. And the reason for that, as I look back in hindsight, was the energy and emotion that was primarily driving me before was this fear of like not having enough money, or not being enough, or just all of these kind of heavier emotions I was moving through. So what I would do if any of my income dropped was, back in those days, I would just constantly grind my face off and hustle to be able to change the situation. But my constant driver back then was also fear. But because of this new awareness and this kind of healing work that I've been doing, I started to transform, and I started to let go of a lot of this emotion that was driving me. But what was left over was this part of me that was like, well, I don't want to operate from that old version of myself. So what does the new version of me do? Like, how do I change my choices and behaviors? And that kind of left me in no man's land, where I was exploring these words like letting go and surrender, and what does it mean to live by that? There was this one book that I read around this time of moving through this home, and I would go to the golf course in Uluwatu every single day because I had no money for the gym. I wanted to move, and I would just go to the golf course every single day. So I would walk around this golf course and I would listen to the book called The Surrender Experiment, which is something I had explored previous. It's by a guy called Michael Singer. And he was talking about how his whole life was just this surrender of letting go of his thoughts, the negativity that they may have carried, the perspectives that he may have held. And he just let go to the flow of life, and then ended up building this, multi-million-dollar, maybe even $1 billion company. So I was listening to this as I was going through this myself, and I was just resonating so hard with this book. And I was walking around the golf course listening to this, and I was like, okay, surrender. What does this mean to let go? I was just beginning to learn what it means to let go to the circumstances that I'm in, and to understand that there is something I'm really learning here, deep, deep lesson. So I started to lean into that. And I started to see drips and drabs of money come in, where maybe a family member just randomly would reach out and say, hey, I'm going to give you this money. Or a friend would offer, and I would be like, no, it's okay, I got this, I can figure it out. And then I would make a couple of digital product sales. And then I would just receive random money from things that I was owed from a long time ago. All of these different moments just started to unfold, and I was like, wow, like there's nothing I'm doing here, but these things are coming in to support me exactly the time I needed support. So for example, these days where I would just walk around the golf course, I would be listening to this book and also simultaneously referring to this book, which I'll get to, and I would just realize that, hey, there's no groceries at home. There's nothing for me to eat. I can't go to a cafe. I literally had zero, like nothing at all. Savings were gone at this point. There was nothing I had. And I would come to the end of the week and I would have some bread and eggs each day around this time. And I had no food left. And I was like, okay, interesting. I have literally no food and I have no money. And I would sit with that and I would just let it go. And it was so painful and so frustrating, and my mind was going crazy. But there was a part of me that was just kind of like leaning in. It was almost like deep within me, you could call it a soul, you could call it just an intuition. Something in me felt okay, like there was going to be fine. But my mind and my ego was just going crazy because all of these things were like crumbling. Who are people going to see me as? What are people going to think? How am I going to fix this situation? What do I need to do? All of the old behavior patterns that I was usually operating from started to come to the surface. But then, as I kind of like settled into this, and by no means was this an enjoyable process at all, not at all, I started to just get money exactly when I needed it, which was exactly the amount I needed for groceries, or to get a certain amount of things that would pull me through the next couple of days. And I ended up going into debt for the house I was renting because I couldn't make the payments. I went into debt for the bike that I'd rented because I couldn't pay for the bike either. And I was back payments for about 3 months or so. I was like, wow, this is interesting. And I was just letting go of all of it. I was like, hey guys, like I can't pay this right now. Let me figure it out. Same with the rent. And this guy was kind enough to kind of give me some extra time. And I remember around this time, this brings me to this book. As I finished the book, The Surrender Experiment, this was just the savior for me. It's a book called Where There Is Light by Paramahansa Yogananda. He's the author of Autobiography of a Yogi, if you've heard of that book. And in this book, it's basically just prayers, affirmations, and his perspective that is taken from snippets of things that he said to people he's been teaching. They got it all and they put it into a book. So there was affirmations and prayers, and I was working on my relationship with God, which has just been an evolution over the last number of years. That even the term God is still a word I'm wrestling with. And as I was reading these prayers, I started to feel like a lightness. I started to feel like I wasn't alone, like I was protected. And as I started to notice these drips and drabs of money coming in, and then I would meet certain people, and certain people would have a conversation, they would have something to say that would lead me to an opportunity, and then that would make a little bit of money, and these little things started to unfold. I started to see the term abundance in my mind was kind of shifting, because abundance to me had always been financial abundance. You have a lot of money in the bank, that's what abundance is. But I started to understand that abundance is far more than that, right? I started to see it as support, as having what I need when I need it. And as I read this book more and more, I started to experiment with different types of prayer, which I hadn't really done. I was raised Catholic, but we left that very early in our family life. So for a long time, we just didn't really have much religion at all. It was more just I was going down the spiritual path and trying to understand what that meant for me. And I remember there was one day where I was so stressed about money. I was so stressed that my situation wasn't going to change. I was crying my eyes out, lying on my bed, not being able to pay the money for the house that I was in, wondering if I was going to get a text to say, hey, your electricity's run out. How are you going to pay it? And it actually happened. Or we got to let you go from the house. We want to bring new tenants in, you're not paying us. And it was all these different things were coming up, and I was just sitting there, and I just remember crying a lot because I was like, wow, this is really shitty. Then I got a call that afternoon from the person who was managing the house saying, hey, your electricity is about to run out. You need to go and top it up at this place. And I was like, wow, I don't have the cash to be able to do that, because you had to do it in cash. And I didn't have enough money in my bank account to actually make a withdrawal. I had an account that was connected to the card that I had, that was in minus because something else had to come out that I didn't have the money for. And there was another account then that had a little bit of money in it, but I didn't have a card for that. So I couldn't withdraw it because if I transferred it to the other account, then it would make up the difference that was in minus, so I would have no money. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna run out of electricity. How do I figure this out? Went to an ATM and stood there for about an hour, just trying to figure out what I was gonna do. And I was like, okay, I need to ask somebody, can I transfer them the money so that they could take it out of their account? And I came across this Balinese guy who, we had a chat, we had a conversation. I was like, hey man, like, would you mind withdrawing this money and I can give you a little bit extra of what I have so that you can, just get that as like a favor, for you doing this, right? So anyway, got that sorted, got the money, got this guy's WhatsApp. I was like, thanks so much, bro. Appreciate you. And went to the shop and took out the money to be able to, got the money, went to the shop and fixed the electricity thing and went back to my house and I was like, okay, we're good. We're good for however long this lasts. And I remember just having these moments of just pure and utter like shame and guilt, feeling the heaviness of my situation and being like, how am I allowing this? Like, why am I experiencing this? And there was just all of these things, because it's not that I wasn't taking action. I was doing stuff, but nothing was working at all, nothing. And I remember having just such a low moment where I sat down on my knees and I prayed, and I was like, God, if you're real and this is going to be a thing that we're going to be doing for the rest of our life, I need support here. Like, I don't know what to do. Like, I'm really stressed out. I'm feeling a lot. What do I do? And there was this moment where it was so heavy, like it just felt so heavy. And I just heard this quiet voice at the back of my head that said, when are you going to understand that you're part of this too? That I'm not here to save you? And I was like, fuck, that's not what I wanted to hear. Like, that was my immediate reaction, but I couldn't ignore the voice. And I was like, I talk about this stuff all the time. I said I wanted to embody this. This is your opportunity. And I was like, okay. Took a deep breath and I was like, okay, this is reality. Okay, dust myself off, shake it up a little bit. What are we gonna do? Sit in peace. I'm gonna let go of this, sit with this emotion, let it flow, bring myself back into a regulated state as much as I possibly could. And then I got this idea to launch like a community or a group offering that I'd been thinking about for a while and never did. That led into a call that I had with a mentor that I was supposed to have months previous. It was just a one-off call. She ended up having all of these different complications, couldn't take the call originally, but ended up reaching out I think it was 2 days after I had this experience, and we got on a call. And I was like, this is an interesting timing to have this call. And she shared all these different things, and she's a very mystical business person, so there was a lot of cool insights spiritually there. And she started talking about this offer, this thing that I should launch, or this direction that she believes that I feel called to go in. And I was like sitting with that, and I was like, okay, cool, probably do something there. I launched a community, and I started to see money roll in. I started to see these things change. I was like, oh wow, okay, there's something here. The movement from me, the sitting with the emotion, all of it was unfolding, and all of a sudden I made 10,000 euros in a day. And I was like, okay, we're out of the grey. And I remember in that moment going to a cafe. I hadn't been in a cafe for months at this point because I just hadn't been able to really sustain myself. I had to kind of save what I was making and what I was doing. So I sat in this cafe and I was so grateful, man. I was so grateful. I got this mushroom pho type soup thing. It was amazing. I was just reading this book and I was like, oh my days, this is wild. This is wild. And I just sat with what was coming through and I was like, wow, okay, there's something here. There's this surrender and letting go and allowing life to flow, but there's also this movement that's there for me. And I felt like I was understanding this like discipline, surrender, allowing and letting go, but also moving forward with intention, but not doing it from a state of fear, trying to do it from a state of, neutrality and calmness. And so there was all these things I was battling with. And just this understanding that abundance is not just financial. So after I made this money, I was like, okay, well, I need to get out of Bali. Like, I need to get out of this situation. I don't want to be here anymore. I feel like I've done my time here. It's been about 5 months at this point. And I started to speak to a friend who had a cottage available, which brings me to this cottage that I shared with you moments ago. And he was like, you can stay in the cottage, man. You can figure it out and do what you got to do. And I was like, okay, cool. I feel like this is the move for me. So I paid off all the debt that I had from the money that I made. And I went on this journey. I was like, okay, booking my flights and going to this place. And I arrived in the countryside and I was like, okay, cool. I feel like my whole body was just exhaling, like, oh my God, what has gone on? Like, because I've shared segments with the story, but this was just this, there's so many spin-offs from this journey. And I remember the next couple of weeks for me was just sleeping and resting and letting my body actually relax. I felt like my nervous system, right? My body was just like decompressing. It was wild. I couldn't barely do anything. I was just resting. I would wake up tired. I would have a nap. I would sleep. It was just wild. And I started to learn some of these deeper lessons as I was reflecting on all of this. There was many things I was chasing from 2024 previous to that. I was chasing the money screenshots of like, hey, this is what I'm making. This is what I'm doing. Look at me. Staying in all of these Airbnbs, I was caring so much about what people thought about my background or where I was or how I looked. There was all these different things, and I was realizing that I didn't want to be that person anymore. So being in this unfurnished cottage allowed me to relax into the fact that my value, my worth, whatever word you want to say, it's not tied to how I look on the outside. It's what's on the inside. It's the cliche. And I just started to realize, like, the lesson I was learning here was that a part of me had to die for this other version of me that's still being born as I record this video to rise. I wanted to let go of the one who needed to grind and hustle and force everything. And for me to do that, I had to experience what it was like to say no to things along the way and to not make the choices that a previous version of me would make. Because throughout this time, over the last number of months leading up to this, I got offered opportunities. I got offered to speak inside of a community of hundreds of clients and speak on the things like meditation and, you know, mastering your inner state and all these things. And I said no to it because I didn't feel excited about it. Now, when you're making no money, that's an extremely hard thing to do. But I was just like, no, like if I'm going to do this work, I got to do this now. Otherwise, I'm like kicking the can down the road, and someday I'll eventually have to face the same challenge again. So there was a lot of moments like that where it was frustrating and it was hard, but I had to say no. And that's just the path that I had chosen. And I'm glad that I did. In hindsight, this has been the most transformative experience I've ever had. But that part of me I had to let go. So the part of me that I'm stepping into right now is this version of me that is, yes, figuring out this flow. I feel like there's a sequence to life, there's a rhythm to life that the more I become a part of and the more I allow myself to kind of go with that flow that's already happening, the more relaxed I feel, the more peace I feel, but the more uncertain and scary that is. And that's the thing that's been the most challenging. Not the doing, because the doing would have been just me going back to what I usually did. So the hard thing for me was actually allowing these things to just unfold, and for me not to react, but instead to respond and to sit with the emotions of fear and let them go. But then also to understand that I'm playing a part in this too, and there's movements that I got to make to be in a co-creation of what the experience can be. So the sentence I'm sitting with right now is surrender is trust in motion. That surrender and letting go and allowing these things to flow is not passive. It's actually very much a partnership with this energy that's all around us. You could refer to it as God, the universe, source, the creator, like whatever it is. I don't have the answers, but I am in this flow with it, and this was my opportunity to understand more about that. I realized as well earlier in this year of 2025, I had set all of these bigger goals. Could see that my values were changing, that I was going from a guy who was living as a single guy, traveling the world, right? Living his best life around, like making this money, working with these people, and just living a great life. Like not really much expenses, 90% profit margins most of the time. And I could see that my values were beginning to change, that I had this deeper desire to be a father, which I believe is my highest purpose, even before I got into any of this. So as I started to feel into that, I started to set bigger income goals, but then the opposite started to happen on this journey as I set these bigger income goals, which was a fascinating thing to observe. It was almost like I set these big targets, I feel my values are changing, but then I get put through this initiation process to get to choose, to be that guy, to step in and make a new choice. And that's something I'm so glad that I did and am doing moving forward. So there's been lessons and learnings and teachings that I've sprinkled out throughout this video. Maybe some of them resonate with you. I would love to hear your thoughts. Like, is there anything resonating with you right now? This has been such a fascinating journey, and I'm grateful that you're here. I'm grateful that we get to document this process and just see, hey, where's this going to take us? Because I feel like 2026 is going to be the leap forward, and 2025 was the foundations being built, the unsexy parts of life that caused this character to be built. There's a great quote from Steve Jobs, is that some years you win, some years you build character. And that was just what was ringing through my mind throughout this year. So my relationship with money has changed dramatically, and I'll make a different video on this because this has been an evolving journey. This segment I've shared with you here has changed my perspective on abundance, right? What does it mean to be abundant? Well, it means more than just money. It means right money at the right time. It means support from these random people, these synchronicities, these moments that just unfold and happen. And you're like, wow, that was interesting. This thing unfolded here in this way. And I think that there's so much magic in that. And that's really something I experienced firsthand, that abundance is not just financial, it's actually far more than that. And it's changed my perspective around money, around what it means to be supported and taken care of, and that for that version of myself to be born that's in alignment and aligns himself with these outcomes that he set for himself, a part of me had to be let go. And that time was now. So a lot of learnings, a lot of teachings. If there's one thing that you could take away from this video, is that you do not need to be afraid. What I was essentially letting go of throughout this entire story was the fear. The fear of not appearing a certain way, fear of going broke, right? I can confidently say that I'm not afraid of that anymore, because when you experience the fear firsthand, you're not afraid of it anymore. The more you stare fear directly in the face and you look at it and you see through it, you start to understand that it's not as scary as it may seem, and that it's actually an illusion that we give a lot of weight to. And when you start to unravel it, you see through it, and you start to see the truth of not only who you are, but that there's more to this life than meets the eye. So if there's anything that you can take away, it's that do not be afraid, but understand that for you to really feel that, it will require staring the fear right in the face and choosing to be like, you can't fuck with me.